Okay, so a couple of months ago, right when the discourse surrounding Black Lives Matter was about to reach its peak, a lot of mega companies were finally realizing that black people were humans. And as a black person, watching companies realize that in real time was exhausting. And this affected the film and TV industry too. There are a lot of conversations around whether white actors can voice characters of color and what about all those episodes and films concerning blackface. In the midst of this culture war, the BBC and Netflix released a statement stating that they're going to remove Come Fly With Me and Little Britain from its streaming platforms. And the internet went into a meltdown. I mean, the internet goes into a meltdown every couple of days, so it wasn't that big of a deal. However, there were two vocal streams of thought. One was from black people as they thought, hey, this is clearly a distraction tactic. We don't care about this. Nobody asked for this. People are dying. And the other was from these filthy SJWs and Marys are killing comedies. These oversensitive snowflakes are ruining jokes. Why can't anyone think about this? Why can't we use blackface? What about All Lives Matter? What about white chicks? Now, as a media critic and a black one as that, I found the latter group to be particularly interesting. And they asked some really important questions that posited some really important answers, which were, what is blackface, where did it come from, and why is it so offensive? And also, why can we do one but not the other? Because at the crux of it, if what we see impacts us and who we are and value towards other people, so when we consume media that depicts white people or black people in a certain light, how much of it can we internalize without it affecting us? Okay, firstly, what is blackface? Blackface is the act of using paint, makeup, or prosthetics to look like a black person, usually in a mocking way. Blackface has a long history of being used as a tool of violence towards black people. Blackface was used to ridicule black people by affirming some of the worst stereotypes concerning them. The first thing we need to acknowledge is how ingrained blackface is, not just in Western society, but it's used as a vehicle of anti-blackness all over the world. In American cinema, blackface has been used since the beginning of the medium itself, either with actors blacking up for roles or blackface adjacent caricatures, for example cartoons using racist symbols of big thick lips and black bald heads. Writer Eric Lott states that blackface represents a strange mix of envy, fascination, desire, and fear. We don't know when specifically blackface was created in America, but we can guess it was around the 1830s, and it was popularized by an American musician and performer, Thomas Rice. Rice wrote a song called Jump Jim Crow, and Rice claimed he was doing an authentic performance from watching a black stableman dance. Then Rice lifted that performance and used it in blackface and became very successful from it. This started a trend of blackface and minstrel performances all across America. Blackface in popular entertainment started in the art form of the minstrel shows. Minstrel shows are the performance of white actors or musicians blacking up, which began in the 1830s. Minstrelsy quickly became the most popular art form in America. Minstrel performances were the primary mechanisms for white audiences to observe anything related to black culture. Minstrel shows were a way to take away any fears white audiences had towards black people by reducing them to childlike harmless creatures. Minstrelsy replicated and reaffirmed white people's position in the antebellum South, that black people were untamed, uneducated, and in need of white supervision, essentially translating this idea that African Americans were happy to be slaves and needed that subjugation to function. While many white artists that used minstrel performances came from a genuine fascination with black people and black lives, this only proved that the line between fascination of black people and the disdain towards their lives were being blurred. And this tension between fascination and hatred manifested in the type of characters that were used in minstrel shows. These blackface characters were depicted as lazy or buffoonish, traits that are still used to depict black people in comedy centuries later.
Now me consigned to wheelchair, so me got no option but to take the rest of the week off. The Lord shall do work in mysterious ways.
That being said, in America during the 1850s, some black performers used minstrelsy on stage. When black people use blackface, it is layered with meaning and question about one's identity and human rights. When black performers wore blackface, it made white audiences comfortable because it still placed them in a position of superiority. Minstrelsy gave access for black performers to the stage, such as Bert Williams. But that's not to say that everyone back in the 1800s appreciated minstrel performances. For example, after watching a blackface act in 1848, abolitionist Frederick Douglass called the white performers the filthy scum of white society who have stolen from us a complexion denied to them by nature, in which to make money, and pander to the corrupt taste of their fellow citizens. Minstrelsy on stage died out in the 1920s. Rather than that being a marker for any sort of progression, it instead showed a technological push for cinema as an art form. In fact, blackface was in every marker of cinema being pursued as a legitimate artistic medium and not just a working class piece of entertainment. For example, in the 1915 film Birth of a Nation, directed by D.W. Griffiths, was considered to be the very first blockbuster, had numerous of white actors portraying black characters as lazy, idiotic, and sexually deviant. This made the white protagonist needed to be saved from the Ku Klux Klan. Or Al Johnson in the 1927 film The Jazz Singer, a pioneering talkie in the age when silent films were dying out and the introduction of sound in film was being ushered. I think it's important to note that The Jazz Singer was a film about a Jewish man trying to escape his strict religious background in order to be a performer. For Johnson, the use of blackface is used to symbolize a mask that he must wear to not only protect his identity, but his family's strict traditions. However, it is novel to see how the masquerading of black people allows him the freedom that he needs to be what he wants to be. This mental gymnastics in terms of racial relations comes full steam ahead when Johnson is in blackface performing a song called Mammy to his white mother. The text shows Johnson's character proclaiming his love to his mother. However, the meta-text is Johnson's black character proclaiming his love to the subservient slave that took care of white children. Again, the racial politics in film and life is merged in what only could be described as some kind of weird hydra. What should be a straightforward tale about a man trying to appease his family but still trying to be himself becomes layered in meaning when you take Johnson's black character is as far away from blackness as possible. In just about every case, blackface was means for white people or white characters to show their emotional side. Characters are shown to bond, get in touch with their feelings, and show their emotions when it comes to situations. Johnson reprised his blackface in his 1934 film The Wonder Bar, where there is an extended musical number where dozens of people in heaven are singing in blackface. However, this is a white person's black version of heaven, with pork chops growing on trees and watermelons. This strangely shows how in the Jim Crow era, even in death, black people are seen to be still segregated. Al Johnson is, however, just one of many, many white actors who have used blackface during Hollywood's golden era, from Judy Garland to even Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire's tribute, and I use that word very, very, very lightly, in the 1936 film Swing Time of Bilbo Diaggles Robinson, a tap dancing performer. Astaire did say how important black tap dancers and black performers inspired him in his work, and it is possible that, in his naivete, Astaire believed that he was paying tribute to his hero. However, I think this speaks volume to how white society appropriates black culture and benefits from that appropriation. Like Thomas Rice, Astaire is allowed the privilege and opportunities that black performers couldn't even access. And in this insidious culture of lifting black identity and translating it into white men's work is another symptom of white people's ability to be both fascinated and envious of black culture, a thing we still even see today, especially during the music industry. Blackface is so pervasive in American media that even the earliest cartoons donned what I'm calling blackface adjacent. Writer Nicholas Salmond claims, "These cartoons portrayed covertly black people being lazy, deviant, or ugly, once again affirming some of the worst stereotypes concerning black people, and like minstrelsy before it, is seen as family entertainment." Modern Hollywood has occasionally dabbled in blackface since, finding convoluted and satirical ways to justify its existence. Blackface has made a comeback in the 21st century, especially on television, and it is usually presented nostalgically as an odd historical anomaly and a stand-in for more racist times and an unenlightened performers and audiences. You can always bring blackface back in some kind of ironic way, notes Ed Guerrero, a professor of cinema studies at New York University. For example, in 2016, Dear White People, a film about an American university hosting a blackface party, centers around the dissonance between what white liberals think racism is and what it actually is, and how black people are forced to situations where they have to constantly petition for their lives and humanity to matter. Blackface is essentially a symbiotic visual representation of white supremacist ideas towards black people, sexual desire, fear, envy, wrapped in a grotesque fascination. As we've discussed, blackface in American culture is so prevalent and systemic that it has affected the mass general consciousness of how we approach race relations. That being said, whilst minstrelsy and blackface are deemed to be very American, they are much a part of American culture as comic books or corn dogs. However, blackface is everywhere, and not just pervasive in America, but in the UK as well. This comes from the fact that American minstrelsy is multi-layered in its cultural origins, and is a result of many cultures through the slave trade. Michael Pickering posits in his book Blackface Minstrelsy in Britain that various aspects of the cultures of white and black people in these voluntary and involuntary movements fed into the phenomenon of blackface minstrelsy, which emerged in its characteristic form. Pickering continues to write that minstrelsy is quickly taken up in England after its introduction in London during the 1830s, and it quickly became a popular British entertainment during the rest of the 19th century and most of the 20th century. Blackface during the Victorian era was packaged as a formation of commercial popular culture of the industrialized town whose representative features included musicals, the circus, or popular gazettes. Essentially, if you had a minstrel show in your town, it was a marker of culture. Minstrelsy was considered real music, and I can only guess is because in some perverse way, minstrelsy was a way to represent a smaller and more globalized world. Because the music and bodies were lifted from a far-off world and another culture, minstrelsy in the UK was the result of global exports. However, this was an export of bodies as well as cultures, so while in the States, the minstrelsy became increasingly distasteful, that in the UK, it carried on right up until the 21st century. But let's get one thing clear first. Minstrelsy in the UK prevailed for so long, not because of its depictions of black people, but because of its racist depictions of African Americans in specific. Minstrelsy offered a stereotypical depiction of African Americans and their vernacular culture, as these had developed within the system of the British slavery. There were black people in Victorian Britain, however, British minstrelsy seemed to be more focused on the African American counterparts as a focus of ridicule and exoticism. Audiences' reaction in the UK towards minstrelsy was also vastly different because there were such low numbers of black people in the UK. The working classes had no reason to be attracted to blackface the same way that Americans were, because they didn't need to feel that black people were inferior. However, this is important to remember, because while American minstrels and blackface performances were rooted in the lens of what African American lives were like, minstrelsy in the UK moved further away from that, with their performances more geared towards British tastes. So we are left with blackface in the UK, where the black characters acted more like British people, rather than African American people that they were based on. But because it is still blackface, and based on how black people lived, minstrelsy in the UK quickly became more about the imagined lives of African Americans, creating a weird hybrid of politeness and vulgarity. Skipping ahead to the mid-20th century, after World War II, we saw a rise of television entertainment that seemed to retreat back to its root of performances that incorporated comedy, singing, and dancing. One particular and very important instance of blackface on UK TV is the Black and White Minstrel Show. From 1958 to 1978, British audiences became used to the familiar sight on their TV screens, white singers and actors performing in blackface, and on the BBC's variety programming. The Black and White Minstrel Show saw a group of people on sets, usually looking like Southern United States, and the program was launched as a regular Saturday night programming. However, by 1963, it attracted 16.5 million viewers each week. Dr. Christine Grandy writes in a piece for the British Academy Online, states, "The show's longevity belied the complaints and the BBC received in 1967 from Black Britons who criticized the blacking up of the show's centre. However, despite the protests, the show continued, and many at the BBC defended the show's use of blackface." Kenneth Lamb, the then Director of Public Affairs at the BBC, wrote to one campaigner, David Pitt, arguing that blackface minstrels performing a song and dance has been a traditional art form of entertainment in the British Isles for a great many years. Stephen Murphy, the then senior program officer at ITV, also privately wrote to Lamb expressing his support, stating that blacking up is a theatrical convention so old that it has lost any derogatory meaning, noting that any campaigners were only contributing to create a racial issue where there was none. These viewpoints were echoed in the press as well. BBC officials gave interviews to The Times, The Daily Mail, and The Daily Mirror, stating that the show is not about race, but about tradition. Viewers wrote letters of support to the papers, offering similar defenses. Throughout May and June of 1967, discussions of minstrelsy and blacking up were repeatedly discussed in the press as practices that were both traditional in Britain and not about race. Grandy continues to make an excellent point. Campaigners' efforts to name both Blacking Up and the Black and White Minstrel Show as racist back in 1967 marked a turning point, but not one of moral progression. Instead, it exposed how white producers and audiences asserted their authority to define what was or was not racist. And this claim is something that still happens till this day. And this idea that broadcasters could decide what is and isn't racist continues, which is why if you name any British comedian over the age of 40, they at some point must likely use a blackface in some capacity. Blackface in the UK became so ingrained in popular culture for hundreds of years that using it has become a signifier for nostalgia. However, the simple fact remains that it was racist and it intended to be so. And so when we have comedians like David Walliams or Matt Lucas use blackface in their comedy as recent as 2011, we have to ask ourselves, why? Blackface in the 20th and 21st century could be categorized into two reasonings. One, an actor of color is not good enough compared to the white actors, even if the story centers around them. For example, Laurence Olivier receives an Oscar for his role in Othello, and Angelina Jolie as Marianne Pearl in A Mighty Heart. And the second is, well, black people are just plain funny.
Honeymoon massage at 10.
So Comply With Me, which ran from 2010 to 2011. Comply With Me was again actually diverse in their use of black and brown face. However, one of the worst and atrocious comedies I've ever seen was when a character, Mercy, a West African coffee shop lady, would frequently steal from the airport and whenever questioned would act dumb and walk around singing worship songs.
99p breakfasts. Give me oil in my lamp, keep me burning. Give me oil in my lamp, I pray. Give me oil in my lamp, keep me burning. Keep me burning till the break of day.
This again replicated and affirmed the worst stereotypes around black people. Also, Margot Jefferson stated that blackface is always mocking, laced in humor. And Comply With Me, like the minstrel shows before, used blackface to reduce black people as monolithic singing and dancing characters, lacking respect or humanity. The parodies of people and cultures are hopefully done away with, but an extra layer of hurt and trauma is that while white creators and comedians are given the space to play the part of black people in offensive ways, the actual black comedians and actors continue to be limited. Barriers are placed to exclude them from accessing the same opportunities that their white counterparts hold. And however, while there is a step in the right direction, there needs to be a lot more done before we ever reach equality. Hi everyone, thanks for watching. If you liked this video, make sure you like this video and leave a comment down below to let me know what you think. Till next time, bye!